There we go. Thank you, Daniel. So we're going to start today in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1. The Gospel of Mark, chapter 1. So I wanted to just give you a heads up as to my plan as far as the sermons go. Obviously, Easter's coming up, so there'll be an Easter message on Easter. Palm Sunday, dittos. But after going through Philippians and 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians, and after going through Hebrews in Sunday school, I thought we could do a few topical messages. But one of the things that I wanted, when we do go back to some books of the Bible to go through, we're going to go through 1 and 2 Timothy and Titus. Okay, that's what I want to do next. But in the meantime, I have a few messages, and just because it's a little quirky for me to remember it this way, I just start going through the alphabet, okay? So we did one on anger a couple weeks ago, and then last week, believability, because I wanted to bring a message about speaking the truth, but I didn't want to have to wait till S or T or H for honesty. I thought, well, let's just go with believability, okay? And then today it's courage and compassion. Okay, that's the title of today's message, courage and compassion. I don't plan on going through the entire alphabet before going back to 1 and 2 Timothy, but that's the plan. Okay, courage and compassion. Courage and compassion. To give you an idea, sometimes we need courage, sometimes we need compassion, and sometimes we need both, okay? And you might think, well, how could you possibly have both in the same circumstances? Well, very easily, actually. Now, if we were to think about David in his life and the things that he's known for, one of the first things that people would say, well, he killed Goliath, David and Goliath. What a great Bible story. David was a teenager, taking care of the sheep. He was the youngest kid in the family, and taking care of the sheep was kind of the low man on the totem pole job for the family, kind of like taking out the trash in our day and age. And so he took care of the sheep. And the older brothers went out to war, and they were fighting the Philistines. And Jesse, the dad, said, well, I'm kind of wondering how our sons are doing. David, would you please go to the battle and see how they're doing, and take them some food, take them some provisions, and just cheer them up a little bit, see what's going on, and come and tell me. Well, so he left the sheep with someone to take care of the sheep. He got the provisions together, and he went off and got there to the battlefield. And he was a little surprised because there was no battle going on. The men are there, and they're kind of worried, actually. And come to find out, they're worried about Goliath, because every day Goliath would go out and stand in the valley between the two armies, and he would look at the Israeli army, and he would just cuss and swear, and he'd say, I defy your God, and I challenge you to send one man out here to beat me. And if he kills me, then all of us will be your servants. But if I kill him, then all of you will be our servants. Well, this guy was mammoth. He was a giant. He was like 9 feet tall. He would have been good in the NBA, you know. He could just walk under the rim and, you know, he'd hit his head almost. But he was a giant. Had this armor that was incredibly heavy, had a spear that was incredibly big. He was just a monster of a man. And nobody was going to challenge him. Nobody accepted that challenge. And David said, well, what's going on here? He just defied the army of the living God. Is there not a cause? Isn't that reason enough to do something? Surely someone's going to fight him. If no one will fight him, I'll fight him. He's a little kid. And word gets back to Saul. And he said, well, tell him to come here. I mean, I think Saul might have been a little relieved. So he goes, and this whole story is about raw courage. I mean, honestly, David fighting a giant by himself. He didn't have a gun. He had a slingshot. That's all he had. Didn't have a sword, didn't have a spear. Goes to see King Saul, and Saul said, here, try this armor on. Saul wanted him to use his own armor. That was King Saul being magnanimous. Okay, that's what that was. It didn't fit. It was too heavy. It was too big. It didn't work. He said, I can't do this. I haven't proved this. I haven't tested this armor. It's like giving a kid a shotgun and saying, here, well, if he's never used a gun before, what's he going to do with that? You know, that's, well, never mind. Yeah, we don't need to go there. So he says, I'm just going to go out there and use what I know to use. I'm going to use the slingshot that I'm good at. And he said, King Saul, don't worry. I was able to kill a bear, and I was able to kill a lion, and God's got this. I serve the living God, and he's gonna take care of this for me. And that's how it worked out. Now, Goliath had the intention of killing whoever came out there. That was his intention. Stated day after day, I'll kill whoever comes out here, and all of you will be our servants. Well, later on, King Saul himself turns against David and wants to kill him. And he's chasing him all over the mountainside. And one night, Saul is sleeping in a cave, and David is in the cave, and Saul is there sleeping. And David had a chance to avenge himself, and he chose not to. In the one instance, he had courage. In the other instance, he showed compassion. He did not kill King Saul. Now, that was years apart. That was two separate events, and actually three, because there were twice he could have killed Saul and he didn't. But the fact is, there are times when in the same moment, you can show both courage and compassion. And that's what we're going to look at in Mark chapter 1, verses 21 through 33. Mark chapter 1, 21 through 33. And they went into Capernaum, and straightway on the Sabbath day he entered into the synagogue and taught. And they were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one that had authority and not as the scribes. And there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, Let us alone. What have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth? Art thou come to destroy us? I know thee, who thou art, the Holy One of God. And Jesus rebuked him, saying, Hold thy peace, and come out of him. And when the unclean spirit had torn him and cried with a loud voice, he came out of him. And they were all amazed, insomuch that they questioned among themselves, saying, What thing is this? What new doctrine is this? For with authority commandeth he even the unclean spirits, and they do obey him. And immediately his fame spread abroad throughout all the region round about Galilee. Now, before we go any farther, this is the very beginning of Mark's gospel, and here he is throwing out a demon. He goes into the synagogue, and that was what they did, not just on Sabbath, but especially on Sabbath. And he's there, and he sees this demon-possessed man causing havoc. And he commands the demon to leave him. And that's what happens. This is very unusual. These things just don't happen. And everyone's standing there, I'm sure, with their mouth open, wondering, who is this man? Who has this authority over the demons? But the point is, and you read in other Gospels, there were 7 miracles that Jesus did on the Sabbath. He left there and he went to Peter's house. In the next verse, we'll read this. If you look down there at verse 29, Mark 1:29. And forthwith means right away, when they were come out of the synagogue, they entered into the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. But Simon's wife's mother lay sick of a fever, and anon they tell him of her. And he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and immediately the fever left her, and she ministered unto them. And at even, when the sun did set, they brought unto him all that were diseased, and them that were possessed with devils, and all the city was gathered together at the door. This was still the Sabbath. He healed a man in the synagogue on the Sabbath. Now, in this particular passage in Mark, you don't see the Pharisees and the scribes bickering about what to do. But anytime he did anything on the Sabbath, that was one of the results. Because you're not supposed to do anything on the Sabbath. You're not supposed to lift a finger. Basically, you're not supposed to cook your meals. You're supposed to do that ahead of time. You can only walk a certain number of steps. You can't walk too far. You're supposed to rest. The Sabbath is the Lord's day, and it's meant for rest. The Lord rested on the seventh day, and he wants us to rest on the seventh day. Well, you remember that at one point the disciples were walking through a cornfield or some wheat field or whatever, and they were hungry, and they started eating, and Jesus said, that's okay. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath. He gave them a free pass. He gave them an exemption. They were able to eat, and it's not that you can't eat anything, but you're not supposed to harvest anything. It was considered work to reach up and grab an apple off of a tree. They weren't supposed to do anything like that. But they were hungry, and they were about ready to fall over from their hunger. And he said, go ahead and eat. Now, folks, does that mean that there's going to be a little loophole anytime you and I feel like we should do something that we shouldn't do? No. There's not a lot of loopholes. But the Lord is the one that gave him permission to do this, gave them permission. The point I'm trying to make here is, when the Lord wants, he goes into another synagogue another time. I'm not going to go through all seven, okay? I'm not going to go through all seven miracles. But in another one, he goes into a synagogue, and there's a man inside the synagogue with a withered hand. You know, his hand is just lame. And the Lord said, he said, stand up here, come up here. So the man went up there with his withered hand, and the Pharisees and the scribes are standing around thinking, what's he going to do? The Lord knows what's going on. He knew what they were thinking. And he looked at them and said, Is it right to do good? Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil? Is it right to heal or to kill on the Sabbath? They wouldn't answer. They just wanted to catch him doing something he shouldn't do. That was their purpose. And he said, well, stretch out your hand. He turned and told the man. The man stretched out his hand, and it was just made whole instantly. And then that caused the uproar. They said, you're not supposed to do anything like that on the Sabbath. There's 6 days in the week he can come and get healed. He should not come on the Sabbath day to get healed. And they were blaming the guy. They were blaming Jesus, and there's plenty of blame to go around here, okay? Folks, the fact of the matter is Jesus was teaching a lesson. Everywhere he went, he was teaching lessons to somebody. And he is Lord even of the Sabbath. And here he is. He had the courage and compassion at the same time. Courage to stand up to the religious leaders of the day. Courage to explain what was what and who the Son of Man is and how much power he has. He had the courage to do that, to defy their traditions, and compassion to heal this man that needed help, and compassion to heal the demon-possessed man that needed help, and compassion to heal Peter's mother-in-law. She needed help. But then at sundown, you know, word got out fast. At sundown, when the Sabbath day was ending, because it was sundown one day to sundown the next, at that point, man, they all showed up at the door. They all wanted to be healed. All the sick, all the lame, everybody showed up. Because after all, here's some free, should I say Obamacare? I shouldn't say that. Here's some free medical care for everybody. You know, if you like your doctor, keep your doctor, blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry, I can't help myself sometimes. So here he is, and they all show up. They want to be healed. This is great. Well, that was one example. Courage and compassion at the same time. Another example, Mark chapter 3. Just turn a page over, Mark chapter 3, 1 through 6. This is the one with the withered hand. And he entered into the synagogue, and there was a man there which had a withered hand. And they watched him whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. He saith unto the man which had the withered hand, stand forth. He saith unto him, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days or to do evil, to save life or to kill? But they held their peace. When he looked around about them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he saith unto the man, stretch forth thine hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was restored whole as the other. And the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. He showed compassion and courage at the same moment. And you notice there's not a lot of times when the scriptures say that he got mad. This is one of them. He looked at them with anger. Because they were hypocrites. Because they wouldn't lift a finger to help anybody when they could. And they were going to condemn him for helping someone on the Sabbath day. And another moment he's looking at them and says, even you guys would pull your donkey or your ox out of the ditch on a Sabbath day. Even you will take your donkey or your ox to water and give him some water on the Sabbath day. And if we do that for an animal, how much more important is it to help a fellow human being when we can help him on the Sabbath day? You see, there's such a thing as the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. And the Pharisees were very good about keeping the letter of the law. They would fast twice a week sometimes, even though, the law didn't say that. They were throwing on the religious dust a little bit here. They just are a little puffed up. They did it better than everybody. And, they would go the nth degree to dress a certain way and to say certain words and to pray publicly in the marketplace and on the street corners. They would do everything humanly possible to look good, to look spiritual, to look like they're close to God when they weren't close to God at all. Being close to God was not in their mind. Looking good was in their mind. Looking really good was in their mind. Putting on a show was in their mind. When he was invited to a Pharisee's house for dinner, he noticed how everybody came in and they took the first places, the primary spots, the head table. They filled up the head table really fast. And so he turned around and said, hey, I want to teach you a lesson here. When someone invites you to a wedding, don't sit in the places of honor. Sit in an insignificant place. And maybe the host will come and say, hey, friend, come here. You deserve to be up here. And you're exalted, and you will have the praise of men. But if you sit where you think you deserve to be, and those says, that's really reserved for Prince so-and-so or Governor so-and-so, you need to sit down over here. Then you, with shame and with vergüenza, with shame is the best way, you move over to this lower spot, and that's no good. So don't always want the best places at the table, at the best places at the party, the best table at the restaurant. Don't assume anything about how important you are at any time. They were just filled with pride. And he had the courage to tell them to their face what he thought of them. His harshest words were reserved for the religious leaders of the day, the scribes and Pharisees. He dished out some pretty harsh words to them, but he showed compassion to the man who needed to be healed. I kind of look at this as the ministry that some of you are involved with on a monthly basis with the City Rescue Mission, and how they've just gone through a period of time where they were trying to figure out how to comply with whatever rule was being dished out by Lansing, about she and her and him and he and whatever they had to do. And I don't know how they got around all these rules, but they're there to help people that are in need. That's why that ministry exists. And they were able to do that. That's what I'm talking about. Courage and compassion at the same time. Courage to stand up to something that's not right and to do what someone needs done. That's what the Lord would like each of us to be able to do. In our own way, perhaps. At work, at school, in your neighborhood. If something isn't right, maybe you can say something about it. Maybe you can help set it right. Maybe you can do something about it. Maybe you can organize a petition. I don't know. But there's a time and a place to speak, and there's a time and a place to be quiet. But sometimes we get those mixed up, and when we should speak, that's when we're the quietest. We don't want to make waves. We don't want to draw attention to ourselves. We don't want anybody to know that we're a Christian because it's not popular to be a Christian. I tell you what, it's much better to fear him who has the power to destroy both soul and body in hell than to fear him who can only destroy the body. It's much better to fear God. Much better to be afraid of what he thinks of what's going on instead of what every other human being on the planet thinks. So courage and compassion. There's another example. John chapter 8, please. John chapter 8. Oddly enough, there are some Bibles that will explain that this passage here, the first few verses, do not appear in some of the manuscripts. Okay, well, does that mean it's not a part of the Bible? It's still in the Bible. And so I'm still going to preach from this passage just like I would any other passage. But once in a while, you'll find manuscripts that don't have everything. And honestly, there is no complete manuscript of any original language anyway. But John chapter 8, we're going to read here verses 1 through 11. Jesus went unto the Mount of Olives. And early in the morning, he came again into the temple. Now, this is not a case where he's healing on the Sabbath, okay? That's not mentioned here. Early in the morning, he came again into the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they say unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? This they said, tempting him, that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down, and with his finger wrote on the ground, as though he heard them not. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had lifted up himself, and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. What a perfect picture of compassion. What a perfect picture of courage as well. This is one of my favorite passages. It just raises some curious questions in my mind. What did he write on the ground? I just like to imagine. Picture all these Pharisees around him. Let's say there were 5 of them. We don't know how many there were. And he started with the oldest. We'll call him Ralph. I picture him writing Ralph's name in the dirt. Ralph. With a date and with another name. And then I can picture him going to Ed, and then to Gary, and then to Sid, and then, just naming them one by one, writing their name in the dirt with a date and a name of somebody they offended, somebody they lied to, somebody they angered, some woman they slept with, whatever it may be. He knew they were all guilty of something. The Lord knows we're all guilty. He knows our thoughts. He knows our mind. He knows our words before we speak them. He knows what we've done. He knows that we can't hide from him. Read Psalm 139. If I ascend to the heavens, thou art there. If I descend to the abyss, thou art there. It's like we can't get away from God. He's everywhere. He knows everything of what we're doing. And he knew what they had done. I don't know what he wrote, but that's what I like to think he wrote. And he may have even started listing their sins. And I think that's why the oldest guy left first. His list was longer than anyone else's. Think about it. More years of life, more sin. He was a real rascal. And beginning with the oldest, they turned around and walked out. God's the only one that can forgive sin. But you notice when the woman addressed him, she called him Lord. He said, Doth no man condemn thee? She said, no man, Lord, neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. That's a perfect picture of grace. That's a perfect picture of compassion. And the Lord extends that to each of us when we come to him in faith. The last example I want to give about courage and compassion starts off with some cowardice that turned to courage, okay? Let's turn to Matthew 26, please. Matthew 26. Matthew 26. And we're going to begin in verse 48. Well, let's begin in verse 47. Matthew 26, 47. And while he yet spake, lo, Judas, one of the 12, came, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves from the chief priests and elders of the people. They're in the Garden of Gethsemane here, okay? Now he that betrayed him gave them a sign, saying, whomsoever I shall kiss, that same is he, hold him fast. And forthwith he came to Jesus and said, Hail, Master, and kissed him. And Jesus said unto him, Friend, wherefore art thou come? Then came they and laid hands on Jesus and took him. And behold, one of them which were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck a servant of the high priest and smote off his ear. Then said Jesus unto him, Put up again thy sword into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Thinkest thou that I cannot now pray unto my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then shall the scriptures be fulfilled, that thus it must be? In that same hour said Jesus to the multitudes, Are ye come out as against a thief, with swords and staves for to take me? I sat daily with you teaching in the temple, and you laid no hold on me. But all this was done, that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. All the disciples forsook him and fled. One of the other Gospels, he's asking, Who did you come for? They said, Jesus of Nazareth. And he said, I am. In italics, you see the word he, I am he, but that's italics. It wasn't in the original language. He didn't say he said, I am. The same word that God gave to Moses to describe himself. Moses said, Lord, when I go to Pharaoh and they ask, who sent me? What do I say? Say, I am, sent you. And when he said the words, I am, all those soldiers fell backwards to the ground. He didn't need 12 legions of angels to get out of this mess. He could have just spoken the word and they'd all be dead. But he was fulfilling the scriptures. And all his disciples forsook him and fled, every single one of them. That was the cowardice. That was a shame. But then later, when he is on the cross, he goes through the different trials, the mock trials that they had. And now he's hanging on the cross, okay? Let's look at what he says. John chapter 19. This is found in John 19. (25 through 27). John 19, 25 through 27. Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Cleophas, and Mary Magdalene. And when Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple standing by, whom he loved, he saith unto his mother, Woman, behold thy son. Then saith he to the disciple, Behold thy mother. And from that hour, that disciple took her unto his own home. Now, I believe everyone here has heard enough about the disciples to know which one he's talking about here. Which disciple always described himself as the one that Jesus loved? John, the Apostle John, the same one who wrote this gospel. When John refers to himself in his gospel, he refers to himself as the apostle that Jesus loved. My home pastor, J.C. Joyner, he passed away in December of 2019, just a week or so before Christmas. But I remember him reading a poem years ago. And it was a poem that he wrote, and it was called God's Finest Hour. And it was a poem about his own salvation, about how God had saved him. Now, it wasn't written because J.C. Joyner went on to do great things for the Lord in the ministry, even though that was true. It was written because he knew what a horrible sinner he was when he got saved. That was God's finest hour. The Apostle Paul had the same attitude. He said, this is a faithful saying and true, that God sent his Son into the world to save sinners, of whom I am chief. Paul considered himself to be the worst of the sinners that this world had ever seen. But he was saved because he came to God, put his faith in Christ. When the Lord got a hold of him on the road to Damascus, and he knocked him to the ground, he heard a voice from heaven saying, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And Saul said, Who art thou, Lord? I am Jesus whom thou persecutest. Not everybody has a voice from heaven. But I'll tell you, when God gets a hold of our heart, the power is still the same. It's God speaking to us about our need of a Savior. When that happens, we're miserable until we say, Lord, what do you want me to do? Just like Paul did, Lord, what would thou have me to do? And when we surrender to him, like we just sang, and we give everything we are to God, Lord, forgive me. Lord, I trust you. I can't save myself. I just come to you in faith. Please forgive me. When we do that, he will forgive us and he will save us. We become a member of his family. We are surrounded by brothers and sisters who have done the same thing before at some point in their life. Our name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life in heaven. Everything is settled. From then on, our security is settled. Our eternal security is secured. It's done. John, when he stood at that cross, he was one of the ones that forsook him and fled, because they all forsook him and fled. But then, I think he must have come to his senses and thought, what am I doing? Someone needs to stay with him. I'm the one he loves. I think John knew he loved every single one of them, but he referred to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved, and he got closer. He got close enough to hear the words that Jesus spoke from the cross. That's pretty close. They didn't have microphones, okay? If they did have microphones, they wouldn't have had one on the cross. Jesus, he was being crucified. He was being killed. How much energy could he have had? How far away could his voice have gone? John was standing there close enough to hear him say, behold thy mother. Mother, behold thy son. He was entrusting John with the care of his mother the rest of her life. And John took care of her from that day forward. That very day, she went home with him. John showed courage and compassion. But think about the courage that Jesus showed that day, taking the sin of the whole world upon him And looking up to his father turned his back on him. And he cried out, Eloi, Eloi, sabachthani. Lord, Father, why have you forsaken me? That's what he did. Scriptures say that Jesus, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. That's what he did. It was a courageous thing to do. He laid his life down for us voluntarily, and then he took it up again. And now he wants to show compassion on anyone that will come to him in faith. So I'm going to mention once again a song that means something to our family. And I don't want to embarrass Debbie, but it's a wonderful song called The Holy City. And she's getting geared up to play for Easter, that song on Easter. It's a wonderful song. The third verse of that song says, once again, the scene was changed. New earth there seemed to be. I saw the holy city beside the tideless sea. The light of God was on its streets. The gates were open wide. And all who would enter would not be denied. All who would enter would not be denied. Folks, salvation is for anyone that comes to Christ in faith. Anyone at all. So if you have loved ones that have not gotten saved yet, please encourage them to come and hear a gospel message and just hear the gospel story. Encourage them to come on Easter. Encourage them to come for Good Friday service. This is probably the best time of year to get people to come to church that otherwise wouldn't. Encourage them to come. Give them a tract. Give them a gospel tract. Let them read for themselves in their own quiet time. But I tell you, salvation is for anyone that will come to Christ. Let's stand together, please. Father, we appreciate so very much the fact that you sent your Son to die in our place, to take our sin on him that day. Lord, I pray that you would help us when a situation presents itself, when we need to be courageous, that we would be, and that we would also be compassionate when the opportunity presents itself. We know that the spiritual battle that we're in constantly it's not against flesh and blood. It's not meant for swords and staves and spears and guns. But through prayer, we can have the victory over everything that fights against you. We know that greater is he that's in us than he that's in the world. So, Father, I pray that you'd help us to be courageous and compassionate. Help us to discern what time is best for both of those things in Christ's name.